So now it's time to speak about Luc Picard, and I will do his obituary. It's extremely emotional for me, but I will do it. And I will do it in a rather humoristic way, because I think Luc would have loved to have this kind of obituary. There is no way to separate Nancy and Luc Picard, and no way to separate Luc Picard and Nancy. Those, the city and the man are extremely linked together, and he was always carrying the city and promoting the city all around the world. And this is the very first step of its tribute to humanity. If you want to know everything about Luc Picard, who died recently in 2021, you just have to go through internet, and Serge Bracard and Rene Ginger did a very precise and detailed history of all what Luc did, days by days, months by months, and even hours after hours. There is no question that if you want to know everything about, I would say, the classical way to present an obituary, you just have to look at this internet paper and you will know everything about Luc Picard. If you want to add a little bit, you also have to read what Georges Rodech has written with Serge Bracard in the Journal of Interventional Neuroradiology. It's also a very well detailed paper and a very emotional paper. This is not what I am going to do, because Luc is definitely a man, and a real man. He knows a lot of things about history, he knows a lot of things about humanity, of course he knows a lot of it about interventional, and he has been honored all around the world. This is all this detailed honorific station that he got. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to say all what you read here is just something that is demonstrating that he loved the honors, but more importantly, he deserves the honor. Look at him, how proud, how smiling he is, how good looking he is when he got this honoris causa distinction when he was in Bologna. He deserves the honor. And this is really something that we have to keep in mind. Sometimes you have honors, but you don't deserve it. So from all what I have read in the literature after the death of Luc Picard, I have extracted some points, and I want to reposition those points in the history of Luc, which is also the history of interventional neuroradiology. He is a pioneer. Yes, he is a pioneer. There is no question. Nobody can argue on that. He started with interventional neuroradiology with some others, and he is a pioneer. He is also the founder, with some others, of the French Society of Neuroradiology in 1917, and he was the General Secretary in 1977. He held this position for 12 years. I told you that I want to present his obituary in an humoristic way. You cannot separate Luc Picard from the WIN and from the World Federation. You cannot separate Luc Picard from ethics and from some philosophical approach. No, reposition Luc Picard in the history of interventional, but in the history of the world and of France. At that time, from 1975, when the story started, up to 1999, France was booming, booming. We got the Concorde, we got the TGV, we were leading the civil nuclear energy, Everything was open. The future was great. You know what has happened. This is definitely a fantastic history and a fantastic period. And imagine that at the same period, INR was starting and INR was growing. Pioneer in interventional, but how can you avoid speaking about Jinjo, Rene Ginger? He is the one who invented the concept of interventional neuroradiology, and he was such a close friend of Luc Picard and vice versa. Rene Ginger was always attached with the pipe. Luc was attached with Nancy. Rene Ginger was attached with his pipe. He was the first general secretary of the French Society of Neuroradiology for 7 years, followed by Luc Picard. Read this sentence that was pronounced by the wife of Luc Picard, Françoise Picard. It was in the hall on the mirror, in the dinner at the Château de Versailles. Probably you know this hall of the mirror, wonderful. Rene Ginger was at the end of the table. He was in front of Luc and he had stretched out his leg on a chair. He was out of breath. And he said, "If I am here, it's for you, Luc." He was suffering dramatically. He died 2 days later. They were so close together, but they were so different. Rene Ginger, brilliant. Luc, brilliant. Intelligent, visionary. Both are fitting with those adjectives. But they were completely different. Rene Ginger was a joker, cheeky, provocative, brutal, fierce. And he was just cultivated black humor to his heart's content. You spend half an hour with Rene Ginger and you cannot avoid smiling 10 times. Luc Picard is different. Smiling, kind, diplomatic, sentimental, emotional, up to the point of tears. Betrayal was not part of his vocabulary. So those two men are completely different, humanly speaking, but they share some very important criteria and they share the history of interventional neuroradiology. General Secretary from 70 to 89, both of them. Here comes humor. They are not the only General Secretary that were staying that long. Let's have a look at what's happening. It's 19 years of General Secretary for those two men of the French Society. Some other General Secretary did almost the same. Not as good, but some of them did it. Who? If you look at the history of USSR, during the period of General Secretary of Luc Picard and Rene Jinjo, you went through Leonid Brezhnev, Yuri Andropov, Konstantin Chernenko, and Michael Gorbachev. Isn't it a point of stability? That's something that he would love to hear. Of course, nothing happened if you don't have help. And you cannot also separate Luc Picard from a strong, extremely strong support that came from a man who is Lepoire. Professor Lepoire is a neurosurgeon. Professor Lepoire was believing in the future of neurosurgery through interventional neuroradiology. But he is also known in what we call in France a Mandarin. You know what is a Mandarin? It is what's written on this slide. It's a university professor, like some of them in the room, considerable and even extremely or too excessive power, a sort of legacy from the Napoleonic period. This is something that could not exist anymore. The power of Professor Lepoire at that time as a Mandarin is no more possible today. What he did with Luc Picard, he just said, okay, you belong to the future of neurosurgery, I am a neurosurgeon, but you are the future of my discipline. He's also influencing Luc in the bow tie, as you can see. He was participating, Jean Lepoire, to all kinds of meetings in interventional neuroradiology and obviously to the meeting of the WIN. He was there with us and he was supporting all the team participating to this very first WIN meeting. Here he is. Now, I cannot avoid trying to mimic what has happened to some of us, and especially to Pierre Lagenias and to me. Professor Lepoire was promoting Luc Picard, and obviously what Luc did is definitely under the influence of Professor Lepoire. What Pierre Lagenias did is definitely under the influence of Professor Michel Hurt, the neurosurgeon of Bicêtre Hospital. And what I did is definitely under the influence of Professor Alain Rey. Believe me, without those three neurosurgeons, French interventional neuroradiology will not be what it is today. So obviously, we have to thank those neurosurgeons looking at the future, and in the name of Luc Picard, Pierre Lagenias, and my name, I deeply thank those visionary French neurosurgeons who were fighting against the neurosurgical mainstream. This is what you have to keep in mind. They were fighting against their colleague in the neurosurgical discipline. At that time, we had also necessity of having help in between us. And this is a period where I have been working with Luc Picard. I was going through Nancy for 2 days every week, every 2 weeks. And he was coming to Paris for 2 days every 2 weeks too. It was an extremely intense cooperation between us, and it was so useful and extremely productive. Now, outside, what was the atmosphere? We had to fight with what we call the giant. I prefer to call them the elephant. Professor Drake, Professor Yassargil, Professor Spetzler, Professor Ernest Niemi, Professor De Oliveira, and Professor Solomon. It's not necessary for me to tell you where they are coming from, but believe me, fighting with those guys, it was extremely difficult. Extremely difficult. In addition to that, Professor Sami was there, and he was always recalling that neurosurgery is neurosurgery. At least you see what you are doing. So think about the environment. We were against a lot of people who were fighting against this discipline and, of course, against Luc Picard and against all the others that were accompanying it. It was not a piece of cake at all. Believe me, it was not a piece of cake at all. The young generation today, you are dealing with a discipline which is well established, but pioneers had to establish the discipline, and it was extremely difficult. Honestly, I had the feeling to be an elephant in a porcelain shop, definitely. So this is also good for Limoges. In addition to that, they were calling us failed surgeon. You are a failed surgeon. Look at what you are doing. You will never be a surgeon. Of course, we had almost nothing to offer. At that time, Luc Picard had in his hand a little bit of particle, a little bit of glue, which was completely forbidden to use in the brain. Detachable balloon, the way of Gérard Debrun, with a ligature at the base of the balloon. And then later on, finally, came the coils in 1990. But from 1975 to 1990, we had almost zero tool. So it was extremely difficult to find, again, a well-established discipline like neurosurgery. Think about the way we were navigating and Luc Picard was extremely talented in this, through the brain arteries, with calibrated leak balloon, no wire, flimsy catheter. Look at the way it was looking. This is a propulsion chamber, as you can see here. And through the propulsion chamber at that time, we were using the Persil from the Bal Comparet, the very first one, with Charles Kerber to put something as flexible on the market to finally navigate in the brain circulation. How does it work? Like that. No catheter, no guiding catheter, no wire. You push in the chamber, the catheter flies, and it goes where it should go. When you deal with the brain AVM, it's not much a big deal, because the brain AVM, you have big vessel dilatation and high flow. So there is no question that it was, something which was the very first step of what we were doing. Then you have the WIN. The WIN is extremely interesting. We had to be all together to get some support. It's extremely important for that. So let's speak about the WIN. It was the time where Ronald Reagan was the president of the United States. So Ronald Reagan Americas was economically triumphant, boasted by taxes cut and budget deficit, with high interest rate to attract capitals and fight inflation. This is the context of this period. Now, let's have a look at what's the winter. Because of that, in the winter of 1985, $1 was worth 10 francs. Can you imagine that? So at that time, we had this meeting, once in America, once in France, and in France it was in Val d'Isère. Luc Picard was a very good friend of the owner of the Sofitel. So he was, helping the organization for the group in Val d'Isère. Because $1 was 10 francs, all the American people say, hey, why not we continue in Val d'Isère? It's much better for us. I do understand that. Okay, business is business. Nothing against America. So that's the reason why the WIN was finally every year in Val d'Isère. This is the history of the WIN in Val d'Isère. After 20 years, we had the ABC, so it became the ABC WIN with the influence of Pierre Lageniasse. And here come again somebody who is extremely important in the life of Luc Picard, who is André Forfert. And obviously, the spirit of the WIN was under the umbrella of André Forfert. André Forfert was a sculptor, as you can see. And look at what he did. All those medals, which are ring keys, were done every single year from what you can see here, 1987 to 2008, by André Forfert. Each time you were attending the WIN, you got this medal, which was on purpose done by André Forfert. Wonderful. What a class. Thank you, Luc. Thank you, André Forfert. Wonderful. You will never see that again. You will never see that again. Of course, he loves the honor, Luc. So he was the president of the club who was promoting the memory of André Forfert when he died. And where is he promoting this? He is promoting André Forfert, and he's the president of the club for the memory of André Forfert and his works at the Club of Women for Women, the Soroptimist International Club. What is the Soroptimist International Club? It's a club which is definitely done for women serving women. So Soroptimistic transform the life and status of women and girls and giving them access to better opportunities through education and empowerment. In France, Dr. Suzanne Noël, a famous plastic surgeon, founded the first Soroptimist International Club in Paris. And Luc was a strong defender of the rights of women. There is no question that it was also one of his fights during his life, interventional neuroradiology, but also the defense of women. Ethics. I am a little bit sad, because this is a point where we disagree. Ethics was the second passion of Luc, and perhaps also a duty for him. according to what said Georges Rodech, Luc Picard took the quote of Terence as his own word. I am human, and I think nothing human is alien to me. I definitely agree with the comment of Georges Rodech about that. But there is another man who played a big role also at this moment. He is Jean-Marie Caillé. Jean-Marie Caillé was a kind of brilliant neuroradiologist, but a philosopher too at the same time. So come back to this. This is the words from Jean-Marie Caillé that Luc will definitely share. We have lost the Hippocratic ethic and moved to the relationship with technology alone. Keep this in mind. The patient loses his status of creature and becomes that of the doctor. Oof. Now it is the image that makes the diagnosis. And while the doctor is busy looking at the image, he is no longer looking at the patient, who has become transparent, extremely strong. The risk is that we stop asking ourselves how we function and concentrate on why, the why. So in that way, he was joining Diderot, who said, you have to answer he hows, never the why. These are a lot of philosophy that Luc was sharing. We found in disagreement, Luc and I have to speak in front of you because it was a bad period. In 2017, we had an ethic disagreement. I told him, this is exactly what I wrote. A learned society may well give guidelines on this and that subject, and I would even say that it should. But when these guidelines emanate from a group set up as an office of thought and acting in an incriminating manner, this is a real deviation. Luc was hurted with that, and I am extremely disappointed about that. This is what he answered me. Of course, I have never forgotten all what we lived and built together. It was a very beautiful period of life, but when your public position became so brutal and so far removed from mine on many levels that I often thought that the dialogue between us was no longer possible. Can you believe that? It was a shock for me, and it was a shock for Luc. And I do apologize. I don't regret what I said about this society that was trained to impose ethics on live transmission, but I regret that Luc became hurted by that. He is such a great manager of the department and a great chief. And I completely agree with what said Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. If you want to build a boat, do not gather your men and women to give them orders, to explain even details, to tell them where to find everything. If you want to build a boat, make your men and women desire the sea. Make your pupil desire interventional neuroradiology. This is a strong message. And Luc was there. His favorite painter was Magritte. And if you look at this, it's not a pipe. You can discuss weeks and months with Luc. It's not a pipe. The people you see on that picture are the 4 more important people in my professional life. Jacqueline Vigneault, Luc Picard, Pierre Lagenias, et I forgot his name. Help me. Well, it will come back. I'm sorry for you, my friend. So they are the most important one. Emotion, probably. I am too much emotion for that. Thank you, Luc. You were part of them. There is another sad thing. When you look at this picture, I am the next one. Thank you. Please. Dominique Doyon. 1 minute, please. Stand up. Thank you.